Welcome to this edition of the Food Programme, where we begin our story in an ancient farm building in Hampshire, watching an unusual but very of-the-moment process unfold.
We're looking at this funny collection of sort of cobbled together pipes with little rubber teats attached.
I made that out of washing machine bits.
You figured that out? You did it?
So that we wouldn't have to fill one bottle at a time, we could fill a whole crate. But yeah, a lot of what I've put together is bits and bobs that, you would find anywhere. But then there's also these bits of kit which are very expensive.
This is George Crossley, young organic farmer and founder of Totes, an oat drink he makes from his own oats at the back of a 15th century barn on his family's farm in Hampshire, with the help of Norman Lopez, a refugee from El Salvador.
We're standing beside a big steel tank.
Yeah, so that's a 1,000-litre heated tank. We've got to heat up the oat starches to about 65 degrees in order to get it to break down into sugars. So that's quite hot. And now we've just raised it up again to pasteurise.
How much did this cost you? I mean, well, if you don't mind my asking.
The kind of start-up costs were probably about £100,000.
It's an unusual example in Britain of processing locally what's grown locally. On the one hand, that's an obvious way to avoid those hard-to-see global food chains that bring us, for example, the dodgy honey and dried mushrooms, stories we've recently told on the food programme that you can listen to on BBC Sounds. And on the other hand, it's an example of what food security might actually mean as we understand more about our need to grow a larger percentage of our own food and be more self-sufficient.
So how many are you bottling today and a week, really?
So we're doing 60 crates of 12 bottles today, as well as 25 10-litre bags and 10 5-litre bags. I think it comes to about 840 litres or something like that.
I'm amazed at how labour-intensive it is, and I'm amazed that you could dream up without going to get a degree in food processing this process.
George was growing the oats anyway before he started Totes, but it's his new ability to process them that makes the difference, that mostly hidden step in the food chain that we haven't much thought about. A step that turns what we grow here, grains, beans, peas, etc., into actual foods on the shelf. It doesn't seem very sexy, but as the current horror in the Middle East shows, disrupted supply chains don't just apply to oil. The ability to process what you produce at home is crucial, which is what we're delving into in this edition of the Food Programme, with George and Norman and a raft of others working in processing in this mostly invisible part of our food system.
The tank to mix and pasteurize the oat flour that we saw being milled and turning it into this, I must say, really good tasting stuff. You said, that it's very oaty and people aren't used to that. But it's a nice taste if you've grown up eating porridge, and as most of us have.
Yeah, well, I mean, a food science degree probably would have helped. But yeah, everything here has been figured out by me and Norman.
Good on you and Norman.
Good on them indeed. Until recently, most of the oat drinks on sale in the UK were made from imported oat syrup, diluted and stabilised with various additives before being packaged here. Now the giants Alpro and Oatly are moving to using UK-grown oats, though in Oatly's case, at least, still processing them abroad. But it's not just oats. We process a huge number of foods, leaving aside the ultra-processed foods so common in the UK diet and so damaging to our health. We clean and separate wheat for milling. We brew beer from barley. And then there are those packets of peas frozen within hours of picking in Lincolnshire and East Anglia. Freezing counts and even abattoirs are in the business of food processing. But let's look first at beans.
So it depends what format they're being processed into. So in the UK, we do have some big food companies. So we have Heinz and Prince's, for example. So if they're producing canned beans, The beans they're brought in, they're cleaned, they're blanched, and then after that, they're put into the tins. So if it's baked beans, then they'll have the added sort of tomato sauce in there as well. They're heated to really high temperature, so heated to high temperature and high pressure. And then they're cooked essentially inside those cans. And then from there, they can have the label put on them and they can come to our shelves.
Katie Jones, co-author of a report called The Missing Middle.
Other products, so like jarred beans that we're starting to see slightly more of in the UK, as far as we're aware, they're not produced in the UK. Although transport emissions aren't the key driver of emissions from the food sector, from an environmental perspective, that's obviously a big loss that we're adding that transport in. And then also from an economic perspective, it would be great if we could have that processing and the jobs from that and the economic growth from that domestically here in the UK.
So what can the UK do in terms of bean processing?
So we know there's people who process beans they go into animal feed, as well as beans that go for human consumption. So most of the beans that are produced in the UK are fava beans. Most of the infrastructure is really based around those, but obviously it can be applied to other varieties of beans. For example, we were looking at how could start up innovative food businesses, so we called them artisanal entrepreneurs, how they could start producing products with UK-grown beans. And those companies, they have smaller batches that they produce. We spoke to one of them and they found it incredibly difficult even to find somewhere to can beans without being a really big manufacturer. I'd say there is a missing middle. If we can't have that small-scale production in the UK, then that middle is certainly missing. If we don't have that processing, that's the first step after we've had beans grown by farmers. But in reality, if we can't process things here and get them cleaned up, the farmers, they don't have a market to be feeding into, so they won't be growing them.
3 years ago, I was in Spain for the food programme and visited a small bean processing plant in the Salamanca region, set in the midst of, bean fields. They not only supply Spanish customers, but are the source of those high-quality jarred beans for sale in the UK that Katie just talked about. Come harvest time, Perpetuo Benito, the farmer, will sell his crop to Legumbres Montes, who process and pack them for the supermarkets and for export.
With the Turkish machine, we can sell all the products, depends of the size, and with the optical or color machine, we classify by the color.
And so this is what you call the optical machine,
Yes.
which judges on colour and sends it in two different directions.
Yeah,
Clever. The comparison that strikes me is it's a bit like having a small abattoir in a rural area that makes possible for farmers to do small-scale, medium-scale, mixed farming, because otherwise they could not move the animals to giant abattoirs, and these farmers around here,
you get
could not go
traceability.
to a giant factory.
So you get, you know the origin, you can guarantee the origin, you can guarantee the calibre, and you can work with smaller growers. It keeps the local economy vibrant, and it keeps the calibre of the product where we want it to be and where they want it to be.
So it keeps jobs in this region.
Yeah, absolutely. The communities rely on agriculture.
That was Monica Linton, founder of Brindisa, one of the main importers of beans from Salamanca, both dry and in jars. This type of regional food processing, keeping farmers on the land and money in local areas, is what we don't have a lot of in the UK. Right now, most of the beans and peas we grow to be picked dry and processed in the UK pass through one large processing company, Askew and Barrett, outside Wisbech in the flatlands of Cambridgeshire. Until 2025, they shared the market with the multinational grain trader ADM, but then ADM closed their plant. Now, Askew and Barrett stand alone as the only large-scale processor of beans and peas destined for human consumption in the whole UK.
Yes, this is wonderfully uncorporate.
That's what we like. How you doing? Nice to meet you too. This is my dad, Paddy. Paddy Barrett.
Hello.
Yeah, he was one of the original founders.
That's nice that you're interested in it. Thank you. I think you'll be impressed with what we've got anyhow.
Do you want to go through the back room and...
That was Paddy Barrett, the co-founder of Askew and Barrett, sitting in front of his typewriter in a tiny office, otherwise well populated with computer screens. In the modest boardroom beyond the typewriter, we sat with Paddy's son Justin, one of the company's small management team.
There are some people who do it on a smaller scale. There were originally 3 of us. There were ADM, there were Wherry and Sons, and there were ourselves. We actually now do cleaning for both of those companies.
So ADM closed without a mention, as far as we could see, in the national press.
I don't know the exact reasons why ADM shut. In terms of the business that they are, and obviously the big multinational company, I think peas is such a small part, especially in the UK. And so I think that maybe I can only assume that it was something that they didn't consider it was worth their while to continue with. The factory's closed down, and it's a very sad situation. Competition's always healthy, and it's just us.
Yeah, so. I mean, we should explain that ADM, Archer Daniels Midland, is one of the largest food trading companies in the world.
Yeah.
But we're sitting at this table. We're going to go out into the factory in a minute. And there are lots of samples. There are jars of marifats and maples and green and blues, and I don't even know what those are, and pink beans and green peas. So tell me what you do. What crops are you dealing with here? I mean, explain what we've got in front of us.
Okay, so I just put it on the table. I put a few little things. We do a few more niche crops, like we do maple peas. One variety, a variety called Rose, tends to go over to Asia. They use them for confectionery, and they make jams out of them, and they make confectionery items, which is obviously very different to the Western palate. And so we do the maples would be one of the more niche. We do faba beans. Now, faba beans are traditionally eaten in the Middle East. About 10 to 15 years ago, the figure I was told was that the Egyptians eat 1,500 tons of faba beans a day. Sudan also, they're reasonably large takers from the UK. Then the traditional is the marifat. Marifats are going through the factory today, so you'll see them.
Marifats, I can remember my grandma making things with marifats, but who's eating marifats now?
So the marifat market, we're told, and I only say we're told because we supply a lot into canning, and canning, obviously, a lot of those marifats go in. They said it's fairly static. Marifats tend to be more associated with an older generation who traditionally I knew that my grandma, she used to soak peas when I was younger, and she used to soak them and then, like you said, then rehydrate them and cook them and then make them into mushy peas. They're now starting to use them and promote them in different ways. When you go over to Asia, they have the kind of like the wasabi peas, they have pea-based snacks. Basically what we're looking to do is when we put it through the factory, we've got a lot of processes in place to take out all the individual defects that would come. Now, what we've got here is we've got bits of metal. This is waste, because obviously the splits would come out in the process. You'll see when you go around. This is insect damage, which is caused.
These are peas with holes in them.
Yeah, that's called.
And what are these dark?
So these are mud balls. So where you get from a field, you will get stones.
It's just mud. It's not.
These are clay pigeons.
These are all set out in petri dishes.
Yeah.
And there are fragments I've been looking at the whole time thinking, wonder what they are. I thought they were bits of charcoal, but they're not. They're clay pigeon targets.
These are clay pigeons. You don't see this very often, but if they have a clay pigeon shoot over a field, then the combine can pick that up.
Okay, shall we go and look at the factory
then?
Sure.
Yeah. Stuart's going to come with us. He's our technical manager.
Finding it's a bit more difficult to hear each other because we're getting very near the factory. Okay, so what's going on in there that makes so much noise?
So this is the start of the factory. We're going to go in from the other end. We're actually going to start at the bagging side of the process, and then we can work our way backwards. We just put the orange. So you'll see a robot stacker. You'll also see an X-ray machine, which is at the end to take out that last piece of chalk or stone.
Because pea and bean processing is a very noisy business, we couldn't record in most of the factory buildings. It was only in the final building that we could easily talk and get an explanation of the vast and actually quite thrilling processing we'd seen of marifat peas.
Okay, well, we're in the warehouse, which is phenomenal. I mean, it really is like an aircraft hangar, but it's full of, I don't know what you call those bags, plastic.
So they're 1-ton tote bags.
1-ton tote bags and these are whole marifats.
Yeah.
I feel, Justin, after what we've just been through, I have a whole lot more respect for marifats. I mean, I think, oh my God. So we couldn't record in there because of the phenomenal noise. So just tell us what we've seen. We saw the marrowfat peas coming in, and just tell us about that process.
From the beginning of the process, it's all linear. It goes up through an elevator to come down through various pieces of equipment. We've got screen graders in there to take out anything that's too big and too small. We've got gravity separators which use aeration to grade by weight. We've got needle drums that have been used since the 30s and 40s, which look like a big washing machine, have lots of needles that all point the same way. And they're looking for cracked skins or insect damage to pulses, and then they get carried all the way around to the top, and then a brush strip and inversion of the needles carries them off into the waste. We've got optical sorters which are looking for a colour range in peas and beans and taking out anything that's outside of that. Metal detection, removing stainless steel, ferrous and non-ferrous metals down to about 1.2 millimetres. We've got an X-ray that will take out ceramic, glass and any residual metal that's left alone, down to about 4 millimetres in size. Then a robot bagger which bags everything in 12.5 or 25 kilos onto a pallet, so every pallet looks exactly the same and is as good as we can possibly get it out the door.
It's an astonishing process. I mean, it's astonishing to walk through that. Is most of that machinery old-fashioned? I mean, would it have been done that way 50, 60, 80 years ago, or is there new techniques?
So the problem with the new techniques is, like the optical sorter, there is a measure of losing good peas out of the process when we remove the bad peas, because it uses compressed air. To do it at that speed, it has to, whereas the needle drums, which have been done that way for a number of years, only can take out bad peas because they have to have a reason that the needles have caught them. So there is a measure of offset between working at speed or getting the consistency that we want from the machinery. That's why we use both.
You know, before we came in here, we were talking about the fact that, you know, there's a new interest in beans and peas, but some of the technology to sort and clean is not being made anymore. I mean, I'd love it. You know, everybody in Britain came and did that walkthrough that we just did. I mean, it really is astounding. You know, you'd look at a tin of marrowfat peas or a packet of them dried and you'd go, wow, this is quite something.
The thrill of a legume. The one most of us here will eat as mushy peas at the chippy. Respect. Justin Barrett and Stuart Johnson of Askew and Barrett. A thriving family business, but an island in a sea of vast multinationals who control most of the global trade and processing of beans, peas, grains and seeds.
In terms of processing, the biggest independent canning company is Prince's. In terms of vegetables, frozen peas, and the largest single freezing company is Birdseye, and probably closely followed by Greenyard.
This is Roger Vickers, CEO of the Processors and Growers Research Organisation, PGRO.
You've got processing of different types of products in different categories of the marketplace, and they are serviced by different types of processing and different types of processor.
Are cheap imports of already processed pulses a problem for UK food security, do you think?
I think there's two things there, Sheila. There's the human food side of things and there's the animal feed side of things. The vast amount of pulses produced in the UK are used within the animal feed industry. And I personally believe that greater pulse production in the UK and their utilisation in the animal feed industry as a partial soya replacement presents huge opportunity for food and feed security, and that somewhere along the line there's a balancing act for policy to decide, do they want to care about the environment security or do they just want cheap? And they don't necessarily go hand in hand, and the security and the environment benefits are not rewarded to the grower in the price that they receive.
So in your view, should we try and maintain localised facilities and UK capacity for processing?
Yes, we should. I mean, it's all part of the resilience and sustainability of our food chain. If we let that processing capacity slip away and the production capacity slip away, we'll be entirely reliant on imports. And if we're reliant on imports, that's a structural problem for the UK food supply chain and a national security issue, ultimately.
Do you think the public or the government pay enough attention to this processing?
No, I don't think they do. The wider public to be quite frank, couldn't care less. Maybe they could care less, actually, if they were made aware of it and its importance, but actually they're not. And can you really blame them with people with busy lives and financial issues and worries of their own? We don't really value food in this country in the way that I think we probably should or need to. Other things which are bigger, perhaps perceived of as more value and of maybe some kind of structural or iconic presence in the country, such as steel, can easily grab people's imagination. But the fact that there are maybe a few packets of seed less or a few acres less of peas, etc., as long as they're still on the plate, nobody really cares. That's the way it seems from the inside anyway. It's very sad. We should wake up to these issues, because when they're gone, then they're very hard to replace. The skills within the industry, relatively small numbers of people perhaps being employed in them, but their skills are hugely valuable, and the technologies take quite a lot of money and investment to replace, and then they don't come back in a click of fingers or the flash of a wish.
If you were asked to stand in the pub and tell people why they should care about this middle section of our supply chain, what would you say?
I think probably the way to approach it is, and the nearest relatable thing that we can talk about, is what happened when we were closed down for COVID and we started to see shortages of products on shelves, and the panic that the public is capable of realising when products are short. And so if you want to defend the industry, you've got to try and awaken that feeling to realise, what's it going to be like if we can no longer rely on importing products into this country, and you can't get your favourite vegetables or your favourite food types because we have entirely lost the ability to produce it in our own country. Particularly with the crops that we're talking about, they are ideally suited to being grown in this country.
That was a good answer. I think you'd get people talking in the pub. Maybe you should try it.
I think they just laugh at me.
Roger Vickers of the processing trade body PGRO. If Roger thinks his pub audience would laugh for caring about where our food is processed, that may explain why there was no media coverage or public reaction to ADM closing down their processing factory last year. We contacted ADM several times to ask why they closed the factory. They eventually replied to confirm that yes, the facility closed in June 2025, but there was no explanation of why that decision was taken. The closure is particularly odd, it seemed to us, as it came amid several national campaigns aimed at getting us eating more of the peas and beans they were processing. An oddity I talked about with Josiah Meldrum, co-founder of Hodmedods, which works with British farmers to bring pulses, grains and seeds of all sorts to British customers.
ADM had bought a site in Lincolnshire that processed pulses, and they were the principal processor for our organic pulses in the UK, and actually for a lot of our other pulses as well, because they were willing to take crops in from our farmers and process them in the way that we wanted. Last May, they closed very, very suddenly. There'd been changes within their business, and they'd made a decision that this processing no longer fitted with their business model, and that meant that we had to find an alternative very, very quickly. And really, there was only one other alternative, a fantastic business called Askew & Barrett, who've supported us since then. But yeah, I would see that as a piece of national infrastructure. If it was a steelworks, it would be all over the press and we'd be fighting to save it. But because it was part of our food infrastructure, it seems to be completely anonymous in the system, and people were not surprised or up in arms or were not even aware that that piece of infrastructure even existed in the first place. It is gradually being replaced by other businesses, but certainly for 6 to 8 months, that was a real crisis for us as a small business, dependent on a piece of infrastructure which disappeared overnight.
I mean, that's what Professor Tim Lang was talking about, really, wasn't he, in his report on food resilience, that resilience of a food system. I mean, when something like that happens, it's not the war in Ukraine, but it is something
a global company makes a business decision and whoops, it's gone.
I think obviously we need a diversity of scales. We need on-farm processing, which adds value to farm businesses. We need farmers collaborating and businesses collaborating with farmers in order to create a mid-scale, which brings us some resilience. And probably there is scope for some of those larger processing sites as well, which are processing tens of thousands of tonnes. But we need all of those things happening so that we've got what ecologists call redundancy, that capacity for a system to find alternatives in times of crisis.
Josiah Meldrum, we'll come back to him in a few minutes. We used to have that capacity in times of crisis. Food processing businesses were scattered all over the UK until one by one most of them shut their doors. One famous and well-remembered company was based in producer Nina Pullman's home city of Sheffield, a happy coming together of the industry that used to be at the heart of Sheffield's economy, with food.
So we're here in front of this beautiful red brick building. Tell me why you suggested meeting here. Where are we? What are we looking at?
Right. I'm Richard Godley, and I was project officer for a group of people from the Dungworth and Bradfield Heritage Group. And in lockdown, we'd had an idea, or just before, to do all the heritage foods around Sheffield, because there are a number of them. And that all sort of stems back to steelworking and canneries. So that was the interesting part about it. Not with everybody, but the fact that it's there. And obviously, one of the key ones that came out was bachelor's peas. They started off just round the corner on Stanley Street in the basement of an old chapel. So what you've got is probably the best remnant of their factory. That's the most ornate, if you like.
For people who don't know bachelors, who are they and what did they become famous for?
Well, bachelors started off as farmers from around the Immingham, Grimsby area. They came to Sheffield, like a lot of people, for work in those days. And
when is this? What year are we talking?
Turn of the century, probably around 1890, 1900, around that period. Subsequently went to work on the railways, but having that background as a farmer, William Batchelor and his family decided to reinstigate their peas somehow.
Yeah, obviously Sheffield, most famous for its steel industry, I guess, but what you've been looking at as part of your project is its history in food processing as well, which I don't think people would have known.
No, I don't think. I think Sheffield doesn't align itself with food manufacturing in many respects because it's not what it's built on. It's built on Seven Hills like Rome, fast-flowing rivers, but the factories themselves lend themselves to actually having cans. so there was a few manufacturers set themselves up, so even some of the others that you don't even think about, like Simpkins Sweets over at Hillsborough, they still have to have cans for the sweets. So there's a few interesting heritage foods, if you like, and Bachelor's is just one of those.
So were they the first company in Sheffield, but also in the UK, in terms of what they were doing in terms of canning vegetables and canning peas, like the kind of start of food processing?
Well, canning had been around for a number of years. Often the military had canned foods, which meant that they could survive better on campaigns and things like that. So as the process became, I suppose, better organised and better devised, then the canning became part and parcel of preserving foods, which is what people wanted, because they didn't have the fridges and they didn't have the setup like we have today. Moving into that cannery sort of industry is something that a few entrepreneurs obviously jumped on the bandwagon at the time, and I suppose Bachelors were part of that process. So.
And one of those entrepreneurs I'm very interested in, because she was a woman, female business lady. Tell me about Ella Gasking.
Ella is an interesting character because you don't find many women in that particular period that were involved with the hierarchy of running businesses at that level.
And what did she do for Bachelors then? How did it sort of develop under her? So it became really quite significant, didn't it, as a company?
Well, as a company, it was a major employer within Sheffield. It was a family institution. Everybody knows Bachelor's peas.
Yeah, we should say they're still, one of the biggest names today, aren't they?
Yeah, so they're still producing the things out there, but not in the Sheffield area anymore. Yeah.
Not right in the city centre, which is where we are now, which is quite incredible to think that this was the heart of the pea canning industry. I mean, we're literally about 10 minutes from Sheffield Station, Sheffield Town Hall. It's very much in the centre of the city, isn't it?
Yeah, just about. Yeah, you couldn't get any more central if you tried. Yeah.
I mean, there are interesting remnants of the pea industry when you start looking. I mean, I was driving through Crosspool in the north of the city the other day, and they've recently found this mural of I think it's 1950s advert for canned peas.
I had a look at that. Yeah, it's interesting. It's turned up.
But how significant were canned peas to Sheffield? Because that's another thing that I think people who aren't from the city perhaps don't realise. That it's got a real link to the food heritage here, hasn't it?
It has, and how significant it is to people. It's mainly, I would suspect, down to the fact that it was a localised employer, where families, for generations probably worked there. I think that's the key thing with it all.
There's somebody going into this building now.
So,
I wonder if they know the history of it.
Probably not. Some people probably wouldn't know now. There's an interesting plaque up on there to an elephant that was working in the First World War, which I'd forgotten was there.
Lizzie the Elephant's contribution to Sheffield's factories and steelworks. I don't know what that says about our recognition of food history, that there's a plaque for an elephant and not for Ella Gaskig.
I wondered that myself, actually, yeah.
Yeah, do you think people in Sheffield still have that kind of historic affinity with canned peas?
I think so, yeah. I think pie and peas goes down well. You often hear of pie and pea suppers, don't you? So you do, you with the village halls and things like that. So whether you're at this part of the world or whether you're somewhere down in Cornwall, I'm sure they have pie and peas still. Yeah. In fact, I bought 2 cans myself at the weekend because I like them.
And I mean, we've talked a little bit about, what was going on in that time when Sheffield was at the heart of lots of food processing. What happened? I mean, it's not like that now. When did it kind of close down and why?
As I remember rightly, a lot of the places in the 1980s just shut down. There was all the big steelworks with closures and things like that. So I think it just sort of went hand in hand. The factories shut at the same time as the steelworks. So it does make you wonder if that was part of the reasoning. Certainly 1980s, it was a grim time around Sheffield.
In some ways, it hasn't quite yet recovered from that period, has it, the city?
In some ways, no. I mean, the Castle market area is changing now.
It's taken 40 years.
It's the processing part of it, I think, is quite interesting that it's been slightly overlooked. And the simple reason, steel makes cans. That's it.
Richard Godley, Sheffield food historian and coordinator of community book project The Unsung Flavours of Sheffield. As he said, the grim 1980s, the de-industrialisation that killed steel, with the unplanned knock-on effect on our food supply. Unlike the Spanish, as we heard in that clip from Salamanca earlier in the programme, we haven't cared much about our own food. We were at the heart of an empire, and the empire fed us. And even with the empire gone, we were happy to let the globe take the strain. But what now? Is our lack of places to process food holding us back from getting closer to a system that would feed us in hard times, particularly with pulses? Here's Josiah Meldrum of Hodmedod again.
I think the answer is typically yes and no. At the moment, the UK produces somewhere around 800,000 tonnes of beans and peas a year. We export maybe 150,000 tonnes of that, maybe a little bit more. A chunk goes into animal feed, and then there's still a surplus that either goes for animal feed or it goes for UK human consumption. There's actually a lot more beans and peas being grown in the UK than are being eaten. So there's already scope for us to expand demand really, really significantly without actually changing the infrastructure situation that we have at the moment. And that's what Hodmedod has largely been doing. It's been taking that existing capacity and using it to build demand for different species and different varieties. So I guess the answer is it's working out what the appropriate scale is. And on-farm processing can make a huge difference to a farm business. Collaborative processing in larger volumes can begin to affect food system change.
I take it you're saying you also have to build demand for more beans and pulses. We have to eat more of them, then you could see change.
Yeah, I think the demand has to come first. It's really tempting to say, we don't have the physical infrastructure, let's just invest in that and everything else will sort itself out. But I'm not convinced that's the case. I think we really need to be building demand ahead of those infrastructural investments so that they actually work for the rural economy. I think, again, the contrast with Spain is that they have a really fantastic culture of bean eating. They really value their beans. They really value the farmers that are producing them and the varieties that are grown in particular regions. And we just don't have that.
So what do you think about the current attempts to get us to eat more beans? Can only be a good thing. We're all agreed on that. But are they doing it the right way?
The challenge that any campaign faces in this sort of situation is that essentially it's a marketing exercise. And for example, the Food Foundation, who are running a campaign called Bang in Some Beans, have about £1.5 million worth of money to invest over a number of years in promoting pulses.
Hello, and welcome to Bang in Some Beans, the voice of the Food Foundation and Veg Power 3-year mission to get the UK eating more beans.
Do I eat beans? Like, are chickpeas beans? That is really good.
We know we need to eat more beans. Beans, pulses and lentils are little powerhouses of goodness. They're good for our health, they're good for the planet, and they are good news for stretched family budgets.
I suppose from my part, because we sell UK-grown pulses, we're particularly interested in the crops that can be grown in the UK. And the campaigns at the moment are not really focused on peas and lentils. And my feeling is that those are two crops that we can grow well in the UK and are obviously not beans, but we should be pushing their consumption because they have exactly the same beneficial effect on our health and on the wider environment.
How important is scale, in your view?
I think scale is critical. Small is sometimes beautiful, but not always beautiful. And I think it's really key that we understand what the appropriate scale is for any particular process or for any particular set of outcomes. So we really need a diversity of infrastructure that allows processing to happen at different scales in order to do different things.
Josiah Meldrum of Hodmedod. Back in George the farmer's Hampshire kitchen, over a glass of his latest experiment, his very own chocolate oat drink, I asked for his thoughts on our processing problem. What would it take to get more farmers to follow his example? But first, the tasting. This looks like a glass bottle of cocoa.
So the sweetness comes naturally from the oats.
It's really nice. It's like very, very high quality cold cocoa. If you make it properly, it's good. Yeah.
Warmed up, it's even better.
Really? I mean, the obvious question is, why don't more farmers do what you do?
Extra hassle. I think running a farm is a full-time job as it is, so starting an extra business is, more than most people can take on. I guess I was lucky because I had support from my parents and my girlfriend, so yeah, I've been able to do it. I am definitely trying to move away from having to sell bulk through merchants, and that is what we're doing with totes, and that's what I do with a lot of our heritage wheats that we grow. But basically I have to grow to fill at least one lorry, because if I don't fill a lorry then I get charged for this empty space in that lorry. And so doing more small scale processing, is something that sort of or having access to small-scale processing is something I haven't really ever conceived of, because it's just never been something that is available. For big farmers, maybe the best option is a centralised system where you can send off multiple bulk carriers and load up a grain store. But for small farms, it's quite conceivable that you would have less than a lorry load. And if you get charged for not filling a lorry because your field's too small, then you basically put small farms out of business, and that puts communities down and, rural employment down and all those things. Probably, biodiversity and nature as well.
It's hard to impress politicians, isn't it, really, with, just exactly what that means. When localness dies, what dies with it? But just as we were wrapping up the recording for this programme, we were reminded that an appreciation of the values of localness is not dead. I had a call from Chantel Norton, who with David Markson runs Food in Community, a charity in Totnes, Devon, that takes surplus organic food and redistributes it. I had talked to both of them in January at the Oxford Real Farming Conference about food processing. And then, to my surprise, Chantel was following up on that conversation with news that I hadn't expected. Chantal, you've got some pretty exciting news which bears on our food system.
Oh, absolutely. We got some very significant funding from DEFRA for a food processing unit.
So what kind of processing are we talking about?
So we'll be washing, destoning, slicing, dicing, blanching, sometimes freezing, and in time, hopefully, we'll be able to make shelf-stable products as well. We'll have the capacity to process about 1,000 tonnes a year of produce. So we anticipate that when it's in full production, we'll have about 6 staff. And of course, we'll be working with farmers across the region as well, and getting that good food out to lots of community groups and charities, as well as supplying places like the NHS and schools.
The fact that DEFRA has set up this Tackling Food Surplus Fund and that you are using it in this way, I mean, that's pretty significant, isn't it?
It's marvellous. I think there's a real appetite to learn how to get things working better and to join things up. We're not the only answer, of course, but we hope to be part of the jigsaw that helps join things up a bit better.
I mean, a few hundred of what you have down there would transform things, wouldn't it?
That's our hope. There is a lot of good things happening across the UK on a sort of more local and regional level. And it's often the hidden infrastructure that links all these things together. You know, it's the processing facilities, the slaughterhouses, the logistics of moving the produce around, the IT systems. It's all the really unglamorous stuff that sits behind the scenes that is often so crucial with these things.
Unglamorous but crucial. A good summing up of the importance of that missing middle, the processing infrastructure in our food system. Chantel Norton of Food and Community, on their grant from the Department of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, enabling them to process good food for use beyond the ripe season. Is that a hint of a change in government policy, a new appreciation from Westminster of the importance of local food systems, of building into them a structure that makes processing possible locally and regionally? And in doing that, strengthening our food supply, making it more resilient to global storms. One can certainly hope so. We hope you enjoyed that and found processing a sexier subject than you might first have thought. The food programme was presented by me, Sheila Dillon, and produced by Nina Pullman for BBC Audio in Bristol.